Welcome to the Chapters of Grace podcast. My name is Sarah.
And I'm Heather, and we're two friends collecting stories of God's grace and sharing them along the way.
Before we jump into today's episode, Heather and I just wanted to take a minute to tell you how excited we are for this season's premiere, and we were so excited to get to sit down with Jay and Casey and, talk about their grace story. They were just so transparent and honest, and we just loved how real they were with us, and they didn't shy away from hard topics, and we just are so excited for you guys to listen, and we know that their story is going to be just such a testament to God's grace and His glory. So we're just really excited for you guys to hear today's episode.
So before we jump into this episode, be sure to subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube so you don't miss any new episodes. And we're on social media on Facebook and Instagram at Chapters of Grace Podcast. So be sure to give us a like and a follow there, leave a review. And we hope you enjoy this new episode. Thanks for listening.
All right. Welcome, Jay and Casey, to the Chapters of Grace podcast. You guys are our kickoff episode for season 2. So we're so excited that you guys decided to come talk with us.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, absolutely. So I guess let's just jump right in and tell us how you guys met, how long you've been married. Just go ahead and give us your backstory. And
I'll tell it, because he may not remember.
Oh, that's good. That's a safe bet. Yeah.
So we met about 10 years ago. It was kind of a crazy time. I was managing apartments, and I was married at the time, but my husband was an inmate, and so he wasn't when we got married, but he was at the time. And so I was basically a single mom. I had my daughter, and there was this guy that was crashing my pool at where I worked. And one of my friends asked me, she said, "Who's that guy?" And I was like, "I don't know." And she said, "Are you going to kick him out?" And I said, And so, we didn't talk. Obviously, I was married at the time. And so, but my relationship with Christ, I think, was very new. And I had kind of grown up in a Christian home, but it was just, I had really rebelled from it. And so I was still kind of learning that relationship. My husband was not a believer, and I was still so new that I was like, I can make that work.
Yeah.
But it was just still very fresh. And so I saw him that week. I did not kick him out of the pool, and I did not talk to him. And so 2 weeks later, he was there again. And I was like, who is this guy? And so we happened to be at the pool, and, we start talking. And the first thing he tells me, he's like, "Oh, what have y'all been doing today?" I said, "Well, we just came from church." And he was so excited about that. And if you look at him, he is not the normal person that you would expect to see, sitting in the pew, I think. And so, the fact that he was a believer, it was really exciting for me just to know that, oh, okay, so there's guys out there that are believers. And so then at that point, it was like a really strong feeling of, I wish I wasn't married, because this is the kind of person that I could see myself being with and being happy with for life. But I told him I was married. We walked away. I left it at that. And it was the next day. I was, at my office. I'm working, trying to make people happy in apartments. And I got a call from somebody, and they said, is this Casey? And I said, it is. They said, well, I just wanted to come down to the office. I've got a complaint.
Uh-oh.
And I was like, take a number, just another day. And so here comes this man who's been at my pool, and he said, I've got a complaint. This woman was talking to me all day yesterday, and I got sunburned. And
yeah, it was pretty bad.
So here I am, a giggling schoolgirl, like, oh, you're so silly. And so, we started talking, and we were, really on board with just, continuing to be friends. And I think, it was a very confusing time. I knew that I felt really drawn to being with Jason, but I also knew, it's not what the Lord would want. I can't be proud of who I am in Christ and know that I'm pursuing that relationship in any way. And so there was a lot of, I would say over the next couple months, probably until about Christmas time, there was a lot of wanting to be together, but trying to put that space between each other. And so one day he decided
I was going to leave. So I figured the best way to get out of the situation was just to take off, right? Because, I really had a lot of feelings for her, but I also understood that it was just a bad situation. But the confusing part was of how drawn we were to each other and how natural and how amazing it did feel. Mm-hmm. It was just confusing that you would feel this way knowing that you have a conviction of the Lord. So the conviction was I should never ever pursue another man's wife. But the confusion came from, like, this man was not going to be here for a long time. And it was just an abandonment situation. But I still didn't feel right with it because it felt more toxic than it did anything. Because it was putting her in a very compromised position. So I did take off. So I had been saved.
He's not talking about to light, Spartanburg.
No, I took off to Utah, actually.
Wow.
So,
He's going far.
hey, look.
You gotta commit. Some mountains and some highways.
Yeah, so I took off to Utah. It was wild. And I may have been saved for about a year and a half up to that point of meeting Casey. So I was a new believer. Very, very zealous, but not really according to knowledge. Like, it was, I just knew you needed Jesus, but I didn't understand any of this stuff. So I was just trying to figure it out. Plus, I was a Bedouin. Like, I traveled everywhere that I could and lived out of bags. Like, I really was not stable at all, right? So inside of my heart, I knew that I always wanted a believing wife. I knew I needed a wife to carry out the plans that I felt like God had for me. But to be honest with you, it was more driven from trying to get out of sexual sins and temptations. And that's never, ever the reason you should make a decision such as marriage, is because you believe that it will alleviate sexual issues. That's a much deeper heart issue that needs to be taken care of by the blood.
Just other issues will arise.
Absolutely. More issues did arise. So, because this is that's the beginning of the story. So I took off to Utah, and this whole time I'm keeping my eyes and ears open for, like, I know God's going to send me this woman. And then this woman is going to be like a missionary minded individual that's just all out for this. So I just looked for it all the time. So I ended up getting married. So that happened. And I know that was,
You thought there was only one
people. Yes. So terrible situation. Very, very bad decision. Because once again, the reason why her and I both agreed to do it was for all of the wrong reasons. And it was like the moment it happened, it was just devastation. It felt bad. The house felt bad. I felt like I was in a very dark place for the first time of being a Christian. And that was a place that I never thought I would ever be back into. So her and I was having a lot of problems over there in Utah, and it just nothing was working out. I thought about an annulment from the beginning. This is how bad I felt like it got and how quick it happened. But we kept going. I was like, I know something's going to have to come out of this. But it didn't get better. And I ended up causing some problems in that relationship to where, like, it pretty much brought the whole roof down on me and on her and the church. And it was just, like I said, it was a deep, dark situation. And it put me into a real depressed state. And I think for the first time I was depressed as a Christian. Right? Like, and coming from a lifestyle of never knowing Jesus to being zealous for him, to being put back into what I considered a pit. But this scary part was I knew I had full knowledge of what was going on. So it wasn't like before where you just walking blindly as a non-believer, right? You don't care about these things. You hurt and you go. This was like this. I felt like if there was ever a time where he should have abandoned me, it would have been in that moment. But there was a flickering flame throughout this process. I left Utah to come back to South Carolina to try to do some healing. And Casey had already made a decision on her own that she was going to pursue a divorce with the man that she was with. And what was so blessed about that is I did not force her or anything to make that decision. Right. That decision was made during my time away for a while.
I needed it to be for that. You know, I had obviously thought about it a lot while we were first getting to know each other, and I didn't want it to kind of feel like, okay, well, I'm going to throw this away, you know, for this other. I needed to know that this was something that wasn't going to work, you know, regardless of what kind of antagonists were coming in. Mm-hmm. I wanted to know, you know, this isn't like a ploy from the enemy to put this in here to destroy what I had. I needed it to be that, you know, this just isn't working. I'm trying to put everything into it, and eventually, you know, and I hate to ever tell somebody, you know, yeah, you know, I made the decision to divorce, and I'm happy with that. Right. But, you know, I think a lot of the decisions that I had made beforehand had really created that bed, and I wasn't going to be able to sleep in it, you know, comfortably. Mm-hmm. And so I made that decision. I have to live with it every day to know that I did have a marriage that I finished, but I did it fully without thinking, you know, that was caused by Jason and I meeting. Yeah. And that, I mean, I don't know that I could have continued on in our relationship without constantly being reminded.
Yeah, it wouldn't have worked.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we ended up getting back in touch with each other, and it was beautiful because I understood the sacred sanction of marriage. I knew what I threw away. I knew that you should not just say I do if you don't plan on doing. I also understood the high level of accountability that comes with marriage. It's something that I took for granted too. It was an image that I was seeking. It was a false ideology or ideal. Yeah. It wasn't the truth, right? Yeah. So when we came back together, it was through healing, and we had to go through a lot of personal healing in our relationship with Christ and in life, and that started taking place. And then we decided that we would date, and then we would do it right. And what was really amazing is that ever since I met Casey, there was nobody that could have ever taken her place. Like there still is never anybody who I feel like can take her place. Well, it's true, right? So it's true.
I was gonna say, when he's even talking about this story, he's just so bright in his face.
It's because it's a tough one to talk about, right? Because it's hard to understand. Like, you know, when Joseph is like, you know, what you meant for evil, God meant for good. It's really hard to understand that unless you go through a situation that really felt bad.
Right.
Like,
we forget that. We often forget that people quote that scripture, but they forget what Joseph had to walk through to get to that place in his life.
Yes.
We forget that.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And every story we see that where there were bad and there was suffering. I mean, even our Savior going through what he had to go through, it was the joy of the cross before him, right? So we understood there was something much bigger working and cooking up behind it. So that's what I started paying attention to. But so, can we go ahead and talk about the pornography thing for a minute?
Absolutely, yeah. You launch into
a little segue because this is
into that.
This whole thing was still kind of eating at me. I grew up in a home where pornography was a very normal situation. I mean, my mom and my sister, I mean, they would get DVDs, like my DVDs, and that's just what they did. My stepfather, who I had for about 4 years, I was about 4 to 8 years old. I would be asleep, and we had a little trailer, and you could hear pornography just through the Luan walls. Like it was my whole family indulged in this, so it wasn't a weird thing to partake in this. So from the age of about 16, for the next 15, 16 years, like pornography was a bad situation. And whenever I came to Christ, there was about 4 or 5 months in which I did not partake in pornography. I was like, I'm free. And then the little tendencies and little temptations started arising, and I started falling into deeper stuff, and it just would bite me. And I would do well, and then I would fall. Then I would do well, and then I would fall. So when I met Casey, it was still a problem. When we started dating after it was all like the whole divorce stuff happened, it was still a problem. But then her and I, while we were dating, we decided that we were going to split up. And because she needed commitment that I did not feel I was man enough to give at the moment. Like I didn't feel like I was there yet. I knew I wanted it, but I didn't think I could give it. Right. So I ended up like getting a little double wide trailer in Lawrence and pretty much just like figuring out how to work with my hands for the first time. Like I was a bit like eating like cold stuff out of a refrigerator. Like I was like slum, like, right? Like I was back in the slums, you know. Like, but this is but it was during that moment that God was like, now is the time that the chain of pornography is going to get broken, and I had tried things like covenant eyes and stuff before during our relationship, and it would not work. That was not freedom, and that's what
It's not deliverance, right?
right. Like there's a big difference. I was fleeing, but I definitely was still bound to that stuff. But it was during that time that for the first time ever, I felt like, okay, I'm done. Like I cannot. I'm tired. I'm physically tired. I'm done. So by the grace of God, forsook it, and I was like, okay, one day at a time. Praise God, this October is marked 7 years that I have not engaged in the pornography. So this was just a few months that her and I decided to get married. I did not walk into our marriage with pornography with us. I'm so grateful that I did, because once again, it just would not have worked. So I just wanted to bring that up, because pornography was a big driving factor for a lot of the sexual sin that I was trying to flee from, that I thought marriage would be an answer to, that I thought just running and being missionary was being an answer to. Being a monk in a monastery will never ever fight the flesh, and it just won't. So you need to be released completely. There's no coveting eyes. There's nothing. I have a friend who struggles with alcohol bad, and he says he can't go around it. I said, well, unfortunately, you're still a slave to alcohol. You'll only be free from alcohol when you can look at a bottle of alcohol and say, I do not want this alcohol anymore. So I do want to admit that, like, our relationship became so much better when pornography left.
Yeah. And I think that's so important, because I think a lot of young people who get married, because pornography is such a prevalent issue, like not just with young people. I feel like every age it's a struggle.
It is.
And I think a lot of times people go into marriage, like you said, thinking that like, oh, these issues that I had before, like pornography, like having issues with like self-control and like sexual relationships, they think it's going to disappear when you get married. But in actuality, like you said, it's just going to cause so many more issues. And I think it's so important to talk about that, because
we don't talk about the deliverance side of it. You know, you don't talk about that side anymore. People don't, think about it. Really is something that you have to be completely delivered from.
Yes.
And it's not just something you can run from and say, okay, I'm done. No, it's going to keep coming back until you deal with the heart issue.
Right.
Yeah.
Similar to our marriage, right? Like the idea of divorce is not even a thing that we think about. It's not even an open door, right? This is a life situation now. We, by the grace of God, we're here, so we're going to make this thing work. So, but it's no different than just running from what you know that you need to face. And a lot of times we're scared to face it because it causes us to see who we truly are. And that's a hard pill to swallow.
It is.
Yeah.
In all issues. And I think too, like, we don't talk about it enough. Like, I know I've spoken about pornography issues as a woman. It's not talked about enough in the church. It's not talked about. And I, unfortunately, was one of those people that took it into my marriage, and it almost destroyed it. Almost, but for the grace of God, it didn't. And, there was healing and reconciliation and redemption there, but it almost destroyed it because I didn't deal with it beforehand. And I can say, like, it really almost shook us, to the breaking point. So that is something that we're really passionate about talking about, because it just is not talked about enough. It's not talked about for men. It's not talked enough for women, especially in the church. It's just not talked about.
No, not at all. And honestly, now that I think about it, it's been a while since I've really heard it be a forefront topic in general. I mean, even amongst the culture, we talk about everything, but that's not really being mentioned anymore. And I can only make an assumption it's probably because it's so indulged in. It's just the norm.
I was going to say, I think the church kind of shames away from it, like, well, surely, you don't indulge in these things because you know Jesus now. And the world is just so embracing of it. It's almost like well, why would you even talk about it? I have some beers and I watch pornography, whenever I want to. So
it is. It's front topic in women's magazines and websites. Oh, it's just normal. It's natural. That's what we do. Yes.
It's also so widely available now, and it's even so normalized that like it's in shows, and you don't even think, it may not even register like this is pornography. Like, oh, I'm just watching my favorite show, and there just happens to be all these things on here. And
and books. Amy, we had her last season, and that was where her vice was. It was reading it. And we don't talk about that enough either.
Yes,
You know,
yes, that's a real thing. Yep. In the name of sensuality, or so to speak, right? Well, it's just a sensual story. It's something that's there to woo you. When it's not, it's really there to draw you in.
exactly. And so many married women, you know, are reading these romance novels. They're finding that else, you know, somewhere else than their spouse. And when we start looking outside of our spouse, you know, that's when we start getting into some
You
trouble.
mentioned the youth. We brought our niece has been with us for 6 years now. We have full rights over her. She came when she was 8 years old, so almost 6 years ago, and we found her watching pornography even shortly after she came to live with us. So the fact that an 8-year-old had been exposed to this and was watching some things that, I mean, we just wouldn't even think about trying to search. It was a scary thing. But it also shows sort of the family ties in which we come from. I was just talking to her this morning about that. Like, it needs to be talked about even amongst the little kids now, and that's scary.
It is scary. It's so scary. I saw a statistic actually that said, and I don't know the statistic for girls. Maybe I should look that up. But for boys, it said that by the age of 6 or 8, like between 6 and 8, they'll come in contact with some form of pornography the first time.
Absolutely.
And that, like, it just blows my mind to think about that awakening in them so young of that. And I can't even imagine if, you know, kind of like you said, that normalcy, how hard that must be to, like, get out of that stronghold when you grow up.
It just becomes a part of who you are. Right? It's when you're taught that this is what you're supposed to do, that a woman is merely an object, a nail to be hammered. That's it, right? Then that's the only thing you're going to view a woman as. And it's really hard to shake that. You know, a lot of men who never had any fathers like myself or anything to give them that guidance, or any type of mentors to give them that guidance, especially Christian mentors. We need more Christian mentors. So you come to Christ, and then now you're learning how to be a man for the first time. Like, I got saved at 24. That was when I first started learning how to be a man. I didn't even embrace manhood until I was like 28. Right? That's a long time. That's a handicapped start. You know, so you say, well, how do I learn to treat a woman? Well, it's in the scriptures. How do I learn to be a father? Well, it's in the scriptures, right? So going back to the scriptures is very important.
So I just want to ask this question because I'm just curious, but so did you find it hard, like, connecting with God as a father figure, not having a father figure?
Yes, and sometimes it's still kind of hard, even 12 years later. Yes, absolutely. So as a father now, I can embrace and I see it, right? So it took God allowing me to become a father, especially of daughters, right? Like, it's a whole nother level. Like, if men who raise daughters they're cut from a different cloth, man. You have to be. But realizing, like, there's nothing that them girls would ever do that would cause me not to want to embrace them and to love them. Like, anger is going to be there, but it really is only for a moment. Discipline is there, but it's really only for a moment. As a matter of fact, it could break my heart to even think of discipline in the way that they need to be disciplined, right? So I think now as a father, I know more about my relationship with God. But coming to God, to Christ, I always thought out mentors. And Casey will tell you, every couple of years, I remind her how I've really never had mentors, and I still really kind of don't, like, in the faith. Like, men who I'm rallied around, or who rally around me on a constant basis, I don't really have that. And a lot of that's my own fault of being more secluded than anything. So I'm a thinker, and that causes me to kind of be alone more than I probably should. But it's needed. It's needed now in my life too. Even at like 37, like, I wish that I had a father figure in the faith. Like, I've always prayed for that, and she'll tell you, have I not? Like, because of how important it is for you to see it in the physical, right? To what would it look like to contact an individual, and the individual will tell me exactly what I need to hear, not just what I need to feel. Like, I got a lot of those guys that I can call, and they'll tell me what I need to feel. A man of God who is solid in the faith will tell you what you need to know, not what you need to hear or what you want to hear. So indeed, it started off feeling like I was handicapped, for sure.
Yeah, I think that's a call that you just put out to men of the faith, men of God, to step up and start looking where you are, and for looking for young men you can pour into, you know, and just kind of, I mean, I've had the same issue, I think, as a woman, trying to find, you know, God as a father. That's been a real struggle in my life, trying to fill a void that was left by my earthly father, and you know, having to learn that, you know, his shortcomings were not my fault. and really having to, it's a new facet of God, I think, that I'm learning as I've gotten older, and just trying to figure out that, he can fill that void. And, we have 2 girls, and so I now get to watch my husband be a girl dad, and you're right, they're cut from a different cloth, but that God has been so kind and gracious to show me that relationship and to see how that is supposed to be treated and shepherd. And so I just think he is really kind to have shown me that, and to watch that show, because my girls will never know what it feels like to not have, a dad who cares, or, that kind of stuff. And so I do think it changes how it shapes how your relationship with God is. But
yeah,
for sure.
So, Casey, I want to ask you a little bit about your background too, because I know you said you grew up in church and, kind of had like a rebellious moment, but kind of talk about that, like how you grew up and how you came back to know Christ too.
My parents are divorced, and they've been divorced since I was like, they got married for 3 months, and then they were just like, this isn't working. My dad was very conservative, and my mom is very crazy. So he's met her. She's a little wild. And so it was very opposite ends. My dad's family was Bob Jones, very, very conservative.
Very conservative.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Like sometimes I saw them wear pants, kind of conservative.
Yeah.
Other than that, it was very dresses.
I was about to say, that was definitely my upbringing, so I'm getting some flashbacks here, okay? Getting some flashbacks.
She gets triggered by denim skirts.
I do. Got a little PTSD going on from the denim skirts, I'm telling you.
Saw my share of those. And so, and then my mom's side of the family is very like, all of them have had multiple DUIs, they're just living their best life now. Yeah. And so, I kind of had the exposure from both sides. And, it's like looking back now and just seeing the Lord's hand in it and how he was shaping me with both of those aspects. Yeah. Like, it's amazing to me now. Like, there's just an awe. And so I got to experience, and my kids are regularly, asking me, well, you tell us not to do this, but, you don't know. Mm-hmm. And to be able to tell them, I do know. Yes, I've made all those bad choices. Yeah. I had to pick up all the pieces, and it was really hard. Yeah. And so, I want you to not have to have that experience like I did. I had this beautiful image of my dad's side of the family, just so in love with Christ and having him as the center of their relationships, their guidance. Mm-hmm. As I got older and as I learned that the Lord was my father, mm-hmm. That Christ did die for me too. It wasn't just all these people that were living this perfect life. It was for me too. Yeah. I was able to finally say, well, this model that I've watched them make this whole time, maybe I can have that. Maybe he loves me enough to include me in that. Because I think I've told Jason, up until shortly before I met him, I just kind of felt like, I know what that is. I know that Jesus exists, but I didn't possibly think he could have a place for me. Right. Yeah. And so it meant that I made all those bad choices, but it made me in that appreciate his grace, I think, even more.
Right. I think that's so true. You go through those troubles and kind of walk the wrong path, but once you get to the other end of it, you're like, okay, if I hadn't have done it this way, would I have known his faithfulness and his grace so much?
Absolutely. I think it's so important that you talk to your kids about it too, because I think a lot of parents don't want their kids to see their faults or their flaws. And so instead of saying, hey, I've already done this, I've already made this mistake, you don't have to, I want to tell you about it, they kind of push it under the rug. And I think that's kind of when generational curses just sort of start to snowball, because we don't tell them, hey, this is what I did, we didn't do that right, let's try to do that better this time. Or I think it's hard for parents to want their kids to see them,
there was definitely
in a different way.
Something in me whenever they asked us, you're ashamed to share those things. I don't want to tell you that I did those things. But I knew that lying to them there wasn't anything of Christ in lying to them about that. I needed to make the hard decision to be vulnerable in that moment, so that they can know, I'm trusting you with my vulnerability. I need you to understand that I'm telling you this hard thing for a reason.
Yeah, and teaching them to open up. Absolutely. And talk about hard things.
We always tell them that the world lies to them enough. I don't need them to ever see that we lie to them at all. Right. We are very transparent. Our house is a very open forum. And I think that's why our oldest ones tend to look a little bit different than the typical like youth goer and stuff. Like they do question their faith. They do question philosophical ideas and stuff like this, as they should, because I need them to own that faith as their own. I don't want to force feed anything to them or mislead them.
Right. That's how I grew up.
I was going to say, if you've been associated with Bob Jones, it's almost like you're a Christian. No, you are.
Right. I was always taught, never question God. And I'm like, God's a big boy. He can handle my questions. Like, I have a holy, reverent fear of the Lord. But sometimes I'm like, really, Lord? What is going on? And it took me, because I did not have that type of household. It took me until I was way older, until I came to our current church, until I could really have a full understanding of the Lord and say, it's okay to question and figure out what is happening here for myself.
Right. Yes.
So what would you guys say to, maybe somebody who is struggling with pornography, or maybe is struggling to talk to their kids about their past mistakes? Like how could you guys walk someone through overcoming that? Or maybe if there's a spouse that is keeping it hidden, like what would you guys say to somebody to kind of help them walk out that process?
Well, I definitely want to just speak a little bit to, before Jason left, before, we started dating and everything, it had kind of come to a head. He was still carrying this. And I think, growing up with a side that, my mom's side, it put me into a life where it was very accepted, much like he was growing up. It was, pornography was just something you should expect that your husband's going to watch that,
Yes. All men look. I have heard that in the Christian community.
Yeah, absolutely. And and so I knew that watching him struggle with this, I should just accept this. If I was a good woman, somebody that he would want, then I would be supportive of that. I would let that happen. And I can remember just crying in the bathroom floor, just so hurt that I wasn't enough. Mm-hmm. And so thinking like, what is he getting from that? I need to be that. Mm-hmm. I need to be more of a woman. And just the manipulation that's putting into girls and women today, that's what they need, and it's not. It's a lie to them that's then lying to you. Yeah. And so just to remember that those bits and moments that he may be getting of gratification, of just, almost a high, you wouldn't, hopefully nobody's looking at a drug addict and saying, well, man, I wish I could just be that drug for them. You have to realize that is something that's lying to them. Mm-hmm. And, as, thank you, as it's lying to them, don't wish that you could be that for them, but pray to the Lord that he would deliver them from that he would bring them out of that so that they can recognize his value and then your value.
Yeah.
You have to use wisdom whenever you decide what you're going to share with your children, for the record. Yes.
Talk about it first.
Definitely. I think the transparency alone will sow the seeds now that will allow them much later in life know that they can come to you, because there's going to come a time where they're going to have to come to you for safety, for truth, right? So if they can't get it from home, then they'll probably believe that they'll never be able to get it anywhere else. Yeah. So it's very important for me to first give it to them now, and it's just in the form of seeds, because they don't understand. They think it's unruly, they think it's unbearing, they think this is just you doing too much. Yeah. But I think they all know what we've been through, and right? Because we have a crazy testimony. Both of us have crazy testimonies. So they're able to say, okay, I know they're not lying to me, because everybody who's taken this path, most of them don't make it out. So the very fact that we made it out, I think gives them hope that I too can either make it out or never have to go through it, because it's Christ, it's grace, but it's hard work. They see us work hard. We had to work extra hard to get rid of the things that followed us, from expungements and all of that. Like, that took hard effort. Like, that's just not, I'm a victim, I'm gonna leave it there. No, I wanted to erase everything that I'd done little by little by little. So I think we've shown them what hard work and dedication looks like. So just sow seeds now that can become fruit much later.
And I also want to preface by saying I had just heard this because I had listened to a sermon. I think it was from Transformation Church. I'll have to look, and maybe I can link it or something. But they were talking about a lot of times, like, with addictions and with, you know, struggles, that there's something much deeper there. And so, like, when you were saying, you know, it's not you that was the issue, like, if your spouse is struggling with that, there's a much deeper rooted hurt that they're trying to numb, or they're trying to cover up.
It is a drug. Like, it is a drug. It is an absolute drug. It releases the same hormones that cocaine releases inside of your body. Coming off of this stuff is that of coming off of a drug. So whenever you see the dopamine and all that that's released, that's a true thing. So you're dealing with a drug addict. That's why a person feel like they cannot stop. They don't even know why they're doing it anymore. That's when you know you're in a very bad state.
Anything you want to... Is there any, like, closing remarks you guys want to make before we wrap it up? Anything you want to leave us with?
I mean, I think overall, you know, just to kind of summarize, you know, it doesn't have to be something that's accepted. You know, I can really only speak from the woman's side, but, you know, even as a woman, that it has been part of my life. You know, it doesn't have to be something that's accepted. It's always going to leave you feeling like you need to be what's in that made up world. And those things that they're showing in the videos, it's not real life. This is not real intimacy. It's all a fake thing. You know, it's no different than you watching Harry Potter and saying, oh, gosh, I wish I could be in that wizarding world. You know, this is not real. There's so much more that's out there, so much fullness of life, and it's giving you this, like, smoke and mirrors, this Wizard of Oz of, no, this is better, this is what you want. And so, you know, just don't listen to the lies. There's fullness out there beyond it.
And I think I just want to say, don't be afraid to unplug. Like, I'm serious. Like, and it could be pornography. It could be you knowing that you're going down an avenue of social media that you should not be in. Do not be afraid to delete your account, to get off of the phone, to pick up books, to get some accountability, and to get around people who truly love you. Because, I mean, true liberation is in Christ alone. So just do more of things that lead you to Jesus, and try to stay away from the things that's going to take you away.
Such good advice.
I love that. So good. So thank you guys so much for coming. We really appreciate it. I know it's been such a journey on this podcast, you know, opening up, telling stories, and I just can't wait to see the harvest that comes from this, because, you know, you guys have planted a seed today. You know, you've talked about it from a married couple standpoint. I think it's just going to change lives and open up doors for conversations with teenagers and, you know, stuff like that. And we just really thank you so much for coming on.
We appreciate what you guys are doing.